Hey, loves, thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Real Talk, where I get to have real life, raw conversations with incredible people from my circles and communities who overcome challenges and create amazing. I am so grateful for you being here with us today, here live and on the replay, because I know there are so many other places you can be. So please share, like, and subscribe so we can continue to bring you incredible guests like my magical guest today, Melissa Kim Corter. As an empathic, intuitive child, Melissa Kim Corter was fascinated with other people's basements. Dark, unexplored spaces enthralled her, and her insatiable curiosity toward the hidden dimensions of the mind led to decades of exploring the shadow dynamics within the psyche. For over 20 years, Melissa conducted thousands of hours of personal and group mentoring sessions. She utilizes creative and symbolic forms such as film and fairy tales to reveal psychological patterns and hidden potentials. Melissa has a master's degree in depth psychology with an emphasis on Jungian archetypal studies and is pursuing a PhD at Pacifica Graduate Institute. Please help me welcome the magical Melissa Kim Corter.
Oh, I'm so grateful to be here. You always make me feel so special.
Oh, you're so sweet. I feel the same. And you are magical. So thank you for joining us today. I know that you were just out here in California and it took a moment to get back home. So thank you so much for still joining us today because you had a little bit of a tough time getting home because of our
Oh my
storm.
goodness. Such an ordeal. I'm grateful to be on the ground again and out of airplanes and out of weather and everything, but just really happy to be here with you and co-create. We always have like such a magical synergy when we get together, and it's just one of my favorite things,
Oh,
truly.
thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate that. So today is not even like work. Well, it's never like work. So I'm so excited, and help keep me on tangent because when you and I get together, I'll go all over the place.
Oh, I do the same thing. It always has a way though, right? It always has a way of like kind of coming back around again. Even when we think we're like far off, it's like, oh wow, it really just kind of went where it
Yes,
needed to go. So
yes,
I'm
always.
probably not the best with like getting out of rabbit holes. Like I just seem to find more of them.
I hear you on that. I hear you, and that's okay because I've learned that typically when we come on, it's really just or any one of my guests, it's a conversation, and it's amazing how may I say, spirit just flow takes us and it flows exactly where it's meant to be. So I appreciate you for being open to that.
Yes, that's the best way for me. I love it. I just love being able to roll with it and see where it goes. And, there's just so much magic that comes through when we trust that process. So it's fun to be able to chat with you and tap into that.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Let's
Let's
do
tap in, sister. So can you share with us about the Jung
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So it's interesting because there's a lot of different theories and perspectives on this work, but it's based on the work of Carl Jung, who was a Swiss psychiatrist. And so he basically, or I should say psychotherapist, who took psychoanalysis in a different direction and sort of came up with these different structures to the psyche, and layered in his own perspectives. And so Jungian work works a lot more with different dynamics within us that are hidden, that are sometimes unique, sometimes a little out there to consider. But my favorite part about the work is in comparison to a lot of different psychological theories or practices, it doesn't leave out the soul. It includes the soul. And I think that's so important in that type of work. Like, I can't even imagine doing something without considering the soul or that part of us. So yeah, it's amazing work. It's very symbolic. There's a lot of interpretation of dreams and symbols. And I love that it's also very much about where we are in our life experience based on what's happening and unfolding for us. So it's a little it can be a little unnerving for sometimes when someone's like, well, just tell me what this means. And it's like, well, let's see what that means for you. So it's very exploratory and sort of like, how can we tap into these things for you versus maybe looking up a symbol or trying to go find what somebody else said something represents in a dream. Those are wonderful things, but when you can layer that in with your own meaning, oh my gosh, it's just so exciting to watch all these like synchronistic things and connections come together. So I can talk about it for days and days and days, but it's just my favorite thing.
I love it because I love the metaphors. I love the stories. And and what you said is the metaphor can mean something different to each person depending. And so there's more of an exploration there.
Yeah.
And then how do you get to that exploration?
Oh
Is
my
it through
gosh.
writing, through
It
journaling? Is it
depends. Yeah, I find it really depends on the person, the situation. It's really beautiful because there isn't just one way, to get to the heart of a matter, or to like explore whether it's an issue or a concern or something that we're trying to kind of unravel. There's a million pathways in. You can go through a symptom, you can go through a dream, an image in a dream, or a symbol. You can go through an emotional tone in the body because it's very somatic based also, which is body based. But there's not just one way in. So you can really work with people where they are essentially, or what is comfortable for them. Not everybody is as connected like as we are with metaphor and imagination. That's very comfortable in the work we do because we know the power of the mind.
true?
But a lot of people are sort of maybe unfamiliar with that different, those ways of operating, or we can be really serious and not know how to even work with the imagination and symbols. So there's so many different ways in. There's a million different ways to go about it, but it's also very intuitively kind of based, if that makes sense, to you sort of follow those nudges and intuitions on how to work with it.
Mhm. One thing you said about the Jungian philosophy is it talks about the soul. Like, what do you mean it talks about the soul? Like, it includes the soul.
Yeah. So, in a lot of different types of psychology, there's this idea of you have your mind and you have your body. Sometimes
Mm,
they view them as split and completely different things, where some types of psychology are only based on the mind and thought, and they don't see a connection between the mind and the body. And
mm,
then there are some that do embrace that the mind and body are maybe connected somehow, but they don't necessarily believe in a deeper dimension of self, an interconnected state of being, or being connected to the greater world, to other people. And the soul in this format isn't really, it's not labeled as a certain thing either. It's sort of this ominous field or state of being, but it's a lot of things, and it's also not a lot of things, but it's hard to pin it down because we try not to pin it down in that way with Jungian psychology. It's more this, some people refer to it as the deeper self. Some
mm,
people refer to it as the part of us that's connected to all that is. Some people refer to it as God, or a part of God, or connected to God. And I just love that it is this all-knowing, timeless part of us that doesn't have to be categorized, but really can fit across all different religions, belief systems, and we can find our own relationship to whatever we call that. And I think a lot of other philosophies that are oriented in like a psychological base, like especially if it's like, hardcore working with people in a therapeutic way, they tend to leave the soul out. And this is just more embracing of that other dimension of who we are.
mhm. So what it meant to me, what you said was it's holistic. It's
Mhm.
mind, body. When we say mind, body, soul. So to me, the soul is my inner knowing, spirit, my connection to a higher power. And so now, like, all those are connected, whereas in other philosophies, or can I use that word, philosophies?
Yeah, philosophies, psychologies, like they're all, yeah,
Okay, so this is, mind, body, spirit. It's all together,
yeah,
which I learned that the hard way, but
right. I think many of us for sure.
yeah, it took 40 something years to learn that.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. And and it can be challenging depending on how you grow up, what you're exposed to, who's around you. It's just moving through the world and feeling challenged. Sometimes the pressure and the responsibility of moving from like childhood into adolescence and then becoming an adult is filled with lots of opportunities and challenges. And I feel like
Sure.
in those moments we have things drawn out of us that help us find that part of us or connect to or even start to just question, like, maybe there's more to me than just this body. Maybe there's more to me than me just being this separate human being. We start to ask these other questions, many of us, not all of us, but many of us start to ask those kind of questions and feel led by something or called by something. And I think that's such a beautiful part of it. It's so different, like, but there's this similar tone, and we in these conversations where it's like, yeah, I get that, and this is my version of that, or this is how I feel with that, and we're still kind of like pointing to that thing, whatever that is. And I just love that. I love the discovery of that.
The thing, meaning that like the knowing, or just
Yeah, the knowing, the soulfulness, the depth, there's
mm.
something else there beyond my humanness, I guess you could say, but it's still connected to my humanness.
So would that be similar to the sixth sense, to intuition?
I think so. I do think so. I think there's a little bit of a difference just in my personal outlook of like how intuition can also be. I think we are connected. It is a very deep part of that soulfulness, but I think it's also a skill at the same time that we can really build and craft and hone. And listen to that intuition and trust that intuition. But even if we don't, there's still soul, right? There's
Mm,
still that underlying thing, principle, whatever. I like to also, I've heard of it described as an organizing principle. I'm like, oh, I like that. It's a little technical, a little sciencey, but still kind of a nice thought, right? It's bringing things together on our behalf. There's something really sweet about that idea.
I like that.
Yeah. And it's a
And
nice middle ground, not
yeah,
too woo.
and so the difference, like you were saying, it could be intuition, sixth sense, but that's, and I want to ask you a question about that. However, that the soul, it feels like it's just always there with us, no matter what, if we're aware of it or not.
Yeah. I would agree with that because part of my training is also in typology, and we've talked a little bit about this too. But like psychological types is something where we each have different parts of how we operate, and so some of us are more oriented toward intuitive thinking or feeling, where some of us it's there but it might feel like a less developed part of us, which means then it's in shadow, which isn't a bad thing, but it's sort of like the difference between having an adult driving the car versus the 3-year-old driving the car. It can feel sort of like wonky, and we don't feel as safe with it. We feel like maybe a little out of control, like we don't even know what we're doing here with this. Whereas when we start to practice and work with it, it can feel more like a sense we rely on or we really work with and cultivate. And so in psychological typology, there's these different types. You take these tests, and basically the test can tell you where that thinking or where that intuition function is in your chart. This is what Myers-Briggs, by the way, was formed from. So when I talk about it, it is a little different than Myers-Briggs, but this is like the original psychological typology that was born out of, and it's really interesting. So when you learn that, it helps you sort of see those little differences between intuition and soul, but it's also a language of soul, just like your
Oh,
thinking can still be a language of soul. It can still come from the soul. It's just a different avenue, I guess you could say.
okay, so I love what you just said, and it resonated. Intuition is a language of the soul.
Mhm.
That's beautiful. And
Yeah.
something you said also was we can hone and develop the skill of connecting to the soul. What's one thing that we can do to hone and develop and cultivate that?
Writing. Writing for sure. It's, because I feel like what happens, and I'd say maybe more journaling, because sometimes when I say writing, for people that don't think of themselves as a writer, or maybe they haven't published something, they might sort of feel like, well, then I maybe can't access that because I'm not a writer. But if you can put a pen to paper, you can journal, you can be a writer.
Yes.
And so one of the ways that you can really develop this skill, your intuition, to hone it, is by just writing a little bit every day. I do this every single day for the most part. I'll pull a card for the day, and then I just do a little bit of journaling. I fill a page. Sometimes I'll do it again in the evening, but at minimum, I do that every single day. And when you first start to kind of journal, it's a lot of just your thoughts. It's a lot of, this happened. Maybe I have this struggle. Maybe this cool thing happened today. I'm grateful for, fill in the blank. So, and those are wonderful things, but that's a lot of what it can feel like when you first start to get comfortable with getting everything out of the head and onto the piece of paper. But then studies actually show that if you stick with it, if you keep writing for more than 5 minutes, if you try to get into a practice where you can give yourself at least 15 minutes of writing and not censoring, just letting it flow, letting it just come out on the page, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it's judgmental or harsh or ugly or F bombs galore, you
Let it
just
out.
put it out, like say it, you're moving that energy through.
Totally.
Then what happens is you can actually move from a high beta or high alpha beta brainwave state into a theta state. And this is where these little God bumps or impulses happen within the brain. And so then what happens is you're dropping a little deeper into your consciousness into this more relaxed state. You're less judgmental about what you're writing. You're less concerned with the quality and the tone, and you're more about the creative flow. And when you start to have those theta bumps, these impulses, you start to get these small little intuitive impressions that at first you don't even realize they're intuitive impressions because they sound like your own voice. And so it's like, I should maybe take this other way today, or you just start writing things that kind of might seem a little random. But what's happening is you have things that are rising up from this part of you that's called the unconscious. And there's so much stored there, so many amazing, wonderful things. That writing is one of the ways to tap into that, to get small little glimmers of that, to kind of rise up to meet your conscious awareness. So writing is like the middle ground between consciousness and unconscious, and creating a bridge to begin accessing some of those hidden parts of self and beautiful, amazing, wonderful desires, dreams, parts of you didn't even know existed. So it's one of my favorite things to do. The more it takes practice, because it takes time to trust the process. And we can be really hard on ourselves at first. What am I doing this for? This isn't working. This sounds crazy. What if somebody reads this nonsense? All of that we all feel to different degrees. But then something settles and shifts and something new emerges. And it's really beautiful.
I love that. I've been journaling since I was a little girl, and that helped me so much through, challenging times. And I didn't even realize what I was doing.
Right. That's amazing. So you just
Right.
followed it like a.
Exactly. And then, as I progressed on my journey and I started studying, I read many articles on the science of putting pen to paper, because so often we want to get on the computer, and it's not the same. It's when you put that pen to paper, then something, like you said, magical happen, and then you go in. Sometimes it'll be half an hour, and I'm what just happened?
Yes.
And then that
Oh, I love
automatic writing comes, and then you
Yes.
start channeling. And you're like, "Oh, I had no idea that was, in there."
Right.
So thank you for that
Amazing.
reminder that the
Yeah.
writing is so important. And something you also mentioned, you mentioned the shadow. And
Mhm.
can you kind of define for us, like, what that means? Because I feel like it gets taken out of context. There's so many different
Sure.
definitions. What does it
Mhm.
mean to you? And is shadow and darkness the same thing?
Oh my gosh, I love this territory. This is my favorite, my favorite. So when I talk of shadow, I have a couple perspectives that I should say are probably weaved into my framework of how I see things. So a lot of these concepts are going to come through our own filters, right? Of what we believe, what we've been exposed to. And so some of the filters that I sort of have in my background of this have come from the Jungian work, but then also different like earth-based wisdom traditions, shamanism, things of that nature. So definition of shadow and darkness is going to vary a little bit. Sometimes they intersect. But basically, starting with the shadow part of it, think of it as this dimension of self. So we have a psyche, all of us, and it's the Greek word that means soul. And this gets a little confusing because it's not the literal soul, but it means soul.
Okay.
And the psyche is a construct. So it isn't just our head and our brain and our mind, but it's it's these dynamics that work together within us. It is we have an ego, we have a persona, which is like the mask to the world. When we get so the outer layers are like the persona, and then behind that, you could say, is the ego, which is like a gatekeeper. It controls how we are perceived, or it wants to control how we're perceived.
Mhm.
It's a good thing too, though, because it wants us to also have a sense of separation in a healthy way for boundaries and stuff like that. But then past the ego, we start to get into the deeper self and the shadow and the unconscious. And so I like to think of these different layers because they're not something you can point to in yourself and say, in that zone right there is this. It's sort of this field that we're operating from, where these different layers are activated at different times, depending on where we are in our life. And so the shadow is a hidden dimension. It's beneath the surface of awareness. So even when we work with it, it isn't direct necessarily. It isn't. So this is where this differs in the Jungian work versus other experiences of shadow work. Not all of them, but there's some where they just come from this idea of things that are hidden, but they may not understand what drives those things or where some of these things operate from. So there's lots of different perspectives on shadow work, but from this arena, from the Jungian perspective, it's very much this field that sort of is a containing element. It contains parts of us we haven't met yet of our own selves. It
Ooh.
contains like hidden gifts and skills and talents that we haven't tapped into yet. It does also contain suppressed matters. So think about something like, if you're struggling with something in your life and you find that you keep kind of pushing it down, you're pushing it into shadow, right? And we
Mm.
know, many of us, that usually when we do that, when we're consciously pushing something down, it's suppression. When we're unconsciously pushing it down, it's, oh, I just slipped on the word. Oh my gosh. Suppression and repression. So repression is automatic. We're unconscious. We're not knowing we're necessarily doing it. So the shadow contains all of those kind of elements. And what usually will happen is, as humans, we project. And when we project, this is one of the ways we can start to see what's hidden within us. You can try to go find things in the shadow and figure out what's there, but then you're still dealing with consciousness, which means it's still beneath the threshold of your awareness.
Mm.
So when people say things like, "Oh, I know my shadow," I'm like, "You are not dealing with your shadow," or "I'm fully aware of my consciousness and I don't have a shadow." I'm like, "That's your ego saying that, which means you are really out of touch with your shadow." And I'm playing. I'm not like
I know.
picking on anybody in
But
particular,
but
but
you know what? I love what you said, and I never thought about this, that our shadow also has our hidden gifts. In my perspective, I always thought the shadow was, the things about me that suck,
right,
I
them
didn't
too.
realize
But yeah, there's more.
I didn't realize that in the shadow is hidden, the gifts.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That
So the
that's
parts of you that you're working on developing, the desires you have in your heart that haven't fully manifested,
Oh, I love
the things that are just not known. I like explaining it that way. If it's not quite known, it diffuses some of the fear of what's there, like what's hiding, what's under there. And when we can sort of like look toward things with more curiosity and wonder, it
Mhm.
can diffuse quite a bit And the way we work with the shadow is not necessarily head on. This is where the metaphor, creativity, all of that comes back in, dreams,
Mhm.
because those are symbols and signals from the soul, which works in harmony with the shadow, by the way. It's all part of this field. And so that's when we get little slips of things moving out of shadow into consciousness. So when you have a dream and you have something that shows up in your dream and you're like, what was that? Just think of that as something that came up out of the shadow for you to see, to work
Mhm.
with, to sort of unwind or discover. But yeah, I love talking about the shadow and darkness because we fear it. And what we fear, we tend to label as evil instead
Right.
of unknown. And if we can start to question the things that we are uncomfortable with, we will start to heal division. We will start to shift some of the terrible things going on in this world. We'll become more accountable for our actions, for our projections, for a whole lot of things. So, talking about shadow and darkness, there's no coincidence that I feel like this is just emerging more and more during this time in my life, also. But it's such important work, and it can be magical. It doesn't have to be terrifying. It doesn't mean an absence of light either. It's sort of it can be the beginning of things, right? A seed planted in the earth. It hasn't yet sprouted. It hasn't yet made its way into the light, but that doesn't mean it's not significant and that it's not fulfilling its purpose. It's just in a different stage of incubation. And so if we learn to value darkness and shadow, we will also actually learn how to have more appreciation and gratitude for what arrives through the light as well. But when we deny the shadow, we're also bypassing, we're also missing opportunity, and
Mhm.
maybe even projecting a little more than what we realize if we completely avoid shadow and darkness.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because in my mind, shadow and darkness was, bad, none of us are bad, but
Right.
it was something that we, okay, I need to, what are my shadows? Where's my darkness? I need to heal. I need to overcome it. What is it? How can I do it? How can I be better? And you're saying, I mean, that's necessary. Well, like you said, the seed goes into the darkness and it sprouts through the darkness.
Yeah. Or healing, right? Like some of us, when you get sick or you get a cold, you don't necessarily feel like being around a lot of people
Oh,
or doing extroverted activities or being seen or being vocal. You might want to go into like your little cocoon, your bed, your blankets, your dark
oh,
in your covers and your little healing cave. And so
yes.
it's perception too, for sure.
Oh, I totally have a different perception now.
Yeah.
Again, because well, shadow, darkness, ego, there were these, bad things. And I've also learned that my ego's not a bad thing. My ego helps me. And I'm learning to like embrace the ego because it's necessary.
Yes.
And learning when the ego is holding me back, like when it's fear. And so the next question is, how do we know when something's, intuition and leading us away from something that is not good for us, or if it's fear that's holding us back from something that's great?
Oh my gosh. I don't think there's just one way to answer that. Even within just myself in a situation, the situation sort of determines that, right? Because what one perceives as fear, someone else might just have a slight annoyance toward, or not feel any fear at all. But that doesn't mean there's not, like, for example, let's say there's like a tiger sitting on the street corner and he's like
Okay.
starving and vicious and terrifying. And, someone who just would walk upon that would be like, okay, my life is in danger. I'm terrified. I'm going to run away and get out of here. But what if you actually have the skills to tame that beast? You
Oh,
might not feel as threatened. You still might not want to stick around and get super close, but you may not feel as threatened by the situation. So it's really, I think it's difficult to sometimes discern, especially if you don't do a lot of personal work. Because if you do personal work and if you've sort of worked with um, your experiences around really impactful moments in your life. I like to say impactful moments versus trauma
I
or
like that
traumatic
too.
moments.
I
If
like that.
you if you work with that, you start to have more discernment of what's happening in the body, and recognizing like, oh my gosh, this fear, Here's a great example. I used to feel terrified every time I got into an airplane. I was scared to death. I was convinced that the plane was going to fall out of the sky. I would like dread it so much. And what I realized is that my mind was trying to keep me safe. And so I would sabotage opportunities. I would cancel things. I wouldn't show up for things. I would work around things if I had to fly to get there. Like, it really was a nightmare. And when I made peace with the fear of being out of control, and this is going to sound a little silly maybe, but the symbolic was also making peace with the wind element, I was able to shift that fear completely. Because at first, to come back to what your question was, at first it was like, well, how do I know that this isn't trying to stop me from getting on that flight? What if there is an issue with that flight?
Right.
When I really sat with that, when I sat like, and like, because the fear was always the same gripping, intense, terrifying feeling. It always felt the same. It always felt the same way. And so you have to really work on knowing yourself and diffusing it in whatever way you can to really distill that down so you can sort of get to that deeper, is this my ego? Because anything that has its life being threatened is going to fight back and attack. And that's part of the job of the ego, is to keep you alive, right? So there's that. But then it's like, wait a minute, this is just this is an irrational fear. That's a different example, because that's like, fear of flying is very common. But let's say you're just making a decision, a business opportunity comes up and you don't know if this is your fear or your intuition. I really believe, again, power of writing, write out all the fears. Write out all the thoughts, get it out of the body, get it out of your head first, because if you don't give it an outlet, it's going to compete for your attention and it's going to be harder to listen to your intuition. But usually when I do that, it gets it out, it gives it a form on paper. I can work with it and I can really tune in. I don't need to do that as much anymore. I'm very in tune with my intuition these days. Doesn't mean I always listen or that I'm going to avoid problems or circumstances, but it's much more clear. But it took some work to be able to have that discernment and to say, actually, this is a fear. It's not a sign. It's not out of alignment. Like the last few years, I've really kind of dismantled my own shadow stuff around some of the ways I was bypassing through my language and through my presence of things. And I don't mean this against others who use these words. I think it's all about intention, but I wasn't clear within myself. And so when I would say something like, well, that feels out of alignment, I wasn't asking another question, a follow-up of like, well, why? Why does that feel out of alignment? And sometimes when I would get underneath that, I'd be like, it actually isn't that it's out of alignment. I'm really just having a hard time admitting to myself in this particular moment that I'm terrified. And so projection, again, I want to project onto the thing and make it wrong. So it gives me an out to not have to do the thing that makes me uncomfortable.
That
It's
is
really
so
difficult.
good.
It's challenging,
That is
especially
so
the worlds we operate in, right? It's hard sometimes to have that level of discernment.
it's hard. And digging into the shadow, um, getting the ego in check, being honest with yourself. It's scary,
It
you know,
is.
and sometimes, there's times that we're going through it, and then we get into comparison.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I recognized, comparison is self-sabotage. And then sometimes we feel like we don't fit in, right?
Right.
So how can we embrace our uniqueness when we feel like we don't fit in? And is there really a fit in?
Oh my gosh, I love this. And I'm just going to be like so blunt and honest to say I'm working that out. I'm working that out. I've struggled with that. I have struggled out with my whole life. And one of the ways that I'm working out that, learning how to belong or to fit in or to feel a part of, embrace my uniqueness, is to think about the unique ways that me being weird or different, or how my interests have served others or have enriched my life. We sometimes look at how our weirdness or our quirks or our the things about us that make us different are a problem, why
Mhm.
we're bad or wrong or different than. And if we can flip that and say, yes, we are different because we're meant to be, But how has that served us? And if you don't have a way to see that in a form that involves other people, because sometimes that's true. Sometimes there's things that are just so unique about us that maybe we come from a family or an environment, a society, whatever, a religious background, a culture where we don't feel like we fit into that framework. So what I do is I go to the natural world and I look at, what stands out in nature. What are the unique qualities? I'm always drawn to these things that are just so unique and bizarre and different. And can I appreciate the color, the texture, the pattern? Can I appreciate that if this thing weren't the way it was, I wouldn't have noticed it and I wouldn't have been drawn to it and I wouldn't have received the gift or the benefit of its creative whatever in my life. And so I did this recently, and the exercise that I used was this little visualization where I started, like, I really struggled with darkness because I came from these communities and these industries that were all about love and light. And I love that. And we need that. So I'm not trying to get rid of it or dismantle it, but I
And
didn't feel like I fit in. I'm like, why am I the weird girl talking about death? Why am I the weird girl talking about like these really dark matters? Right. And I had this thought about being a young child and how I would explore the woods. And I remember flipping over stones. And the feeling in my body was exhilaration and fear at the same time. Because every time I flipped a rock in the woods, it was like, what's going to be under there? Is there going to be a salamander, like a cute little whatever critter, a snail or something, or a snake or something else? So there's this weird sort of thing that would happen and I would always do it. Like the idea, the fear of maybe it being a snake never stopped me. I kept wanting to turn over stones and see what was hidden. And now when I think about my life and the way that's benefited the people in my world, it's one of those quirky things that I now am so deeply grateful for, because I feel like it was pointing to something I couldn't see, this strange quality of, when you read the bio, that's why I put the thing in there about basements, because it was true. It was real. I would want to go into the basement and people are like, what the hell's wrong with this child? And I'm like, I don't have a basement. I want to know what's under there. It's the same thing. What's under there? What's under there? How can we make that less scary? And even if we find something under there, there's a way to work with that. There's a way to tame it or to understand it or create a boundary for it if it's too much. But running away isn't an option anymore for me. So I feel like that's how we can embrace our quirks. Look at nature.
that is so good. And I love that. The curiosity, you didn't take the unknown. You weren't afraid of the unknown. And I believe that naturally we are wired to be afraid of the unknown, the uncertainty, to keep us safe. But you pushed through that. So what's the magic in the unknown, like pushing through, going to the other side?
Gosh. I think the people who felt like they didn't belong, which is kind of like the other part of what you were saying. I never felt like I fit in as a child. I was very intuitive. I saw things, I felt things I couldn't explain, couldn't understand. That was sort of unknown territory. It was one of those things that I actually had a lot of shame and guilt about because it scared people. I could visibly see them in reaction to the things that would come out of my mouth. Anyway, so coming back to this idea, it was like those things are unique and they're difficult sometimes to think about or to understand. And yet there is something in that others who understand or resonate are drawn to. And so I feel like it's this idea that there is magic contained in those experiences and those moments. There is something about discovering this big scary thing that you thought was there was not what you thought, and it's something completely different, and now it's a source of power or connection. There's moments where like fear will tell you, don't do it, don't go in that direction. And you do. And you just all of a sudden go, why didn't I do that sooner? So I think it's also a leaning in. When we can lean into discomfort, we will find the magic. The magic doesn't mean it's amazing in the sense of if you are recovering from some deeply difficult, right, traumatic event or situation. I don't like to say things like, find the meaning and the purpose and you'll feel better. That might be true for some people. And I do sometimes think that's helpful. But for other people, I think it's about, let's give a voice to the anger first. Let's
Absolutely.
give a voice to the rage first before we try to find meaning, because we might
Absolutely.
then bypass or dismiss our deeper stuff. And that can be magical and powerful for people to tap into rage just as
Absolutely.
much as beauty or grace or something else.
And that, rage and anger can be transmuted to, to whatever passion, to action. I
Yes.
mean, what
Healing.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so, and I love how you say that, because our range of emotions are there for a reason, and
Right.
to bypass it, um, well, it's spiritual bypassing,
Yeah.
which is toxic. I'm just going to call it out. It is, to what it is. It's toxic,
Mhm.
and I love how you said that we need to get it out, and I feel like it transmutes too,
Yeah.
utilizing it, as a power source to move you into the next, direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, coming back to the shadow a little bit, just based on what you were just sharing now, um, some of us haven't quite, maybe we didn't feel safe enough or weren't taught or whatever, but we're not able to be as cutting into the heart of the matter, right? Or as direct or fierce
Mhm.
or ruthless even with boundaries or situations. And so part of the bypassing that can be really harmful and dangerous is when, if we're only trying to approach something with love or light, we can put ourselves into dangerous moments, situations, experiences. And so something that I learned that I'm working on still is how to be fierce. And
I
I work with this analyst, and she just asked me, she's like, what would your shadow say about this right now in this particular situation? And I was like, I don't know. I gave her some whatever answer. And she just looked at me and she's like, no, like, let's cut into this. What would your shadow say if it had no limitation, no restriction? And next thing you know, I'm just yelling, and I'm like saying these things. And she's just like, she sits back and she's just nodding her head. And I stopped and I'm like, what was that? And she's like, that is shadow. That is the denied aspects within you finally finding a channel out. She's like, so sometimes you need to be the sword. You need to cut through things. You need to be fierce. You need to confront these difficult matters and look them in the eye. And otherwise, they can consume you. So
for
there's
sure.
also something about like giving permission for it to be a little messy.
It has to be messy.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of any challenging situation that I've been through that didn't feel messy and
Right.
glumpy, and, like, I just see black tar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, and
Clawing your way through
yeah,
sometimes, right? Can feel like that. And other times you float, you fly, you're graceful.
that's true. No, thank you. It depends on the situation,
Yeah.
and it depends how attached, you are to the situation.
Right.
Like, it also depends, where is it? Is it part of my identity? Is the situation part of my identity? That's gonna be even, you know, more challenging.
For sure. I'm so glad you said that, because that's really difficult the closer it is to that type of,
For
experience
sure.
for us.
And so what I wanna come to is, the writing,
Mhm.
and I'm so grateful to you because, I mean, I never believed I was a writer. However, I started, as, an author in one of your books, and I was terrified. Writing was never on my, dream list when I as a little girl, or even as an adult, and you inspired me in joining one of your books. Actually, I was in a couple. Um, it was really magical, and having that opportunity helped me build my confidence,
Mm,
and having that opportunity also helped me, heal, because I one of the chapters was, about my mom,
yeah.
and I never believed it in the past. I mean, I've journaled for years, but the experience that I had when I had the opportunity and gift to be in collaboration with other authors, because again, I'm like, I'm not an author. It was such a healing experience. It helped build my confidence, and it also helped me realize we are all writers.
Yes. Oh, I love that so much.
We all have a story. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter who it is. And so, for those that are struggling to believe they have a story, what can you say to them? And those that want to write and they have a story, and most people I talk to want to write their story, but they feel like those voices in their head, that doubt. Can
Oh
you
my
speak?
gosh. Everybody, not everybody, but many people, most of the people I know, and myself included, have that doubt, that inner critic, the voice that's just relentlessly trying to hold you back, which is more the reason why it's actually important to face that. One of my favorite things, like I get this all the time, like I think I want to share something, but I don't feel like I'm a writer. I'm like, do you have Facebook? Do you have social media of any kind? Yeah. Do you post anything? Yeah. Family photos and this and that. Okay. Do you ever write anything, even if it's like a little description, a little whatever? Sure. I'm like, you're a writer. Like you're already doing it. You're finding a creative avenues to express yourself. And this is just another one. You don't, with these projects, you do not have to be concerned about the technical aspect of how to do it. It doesn't have to be extremely formal. Of course, we want soulfulness. We want presence. We want authenticity. We want someone that's going to really definitely connect with their message. But beyond that, we know how to draw it out of you. We know how to help you move through that. I like to think of like when people think of sharing their story, they go big in their
Mhm.
minds, right? They go really big, like, I got to share the biggest thing of my life, or I've got to share whatever. And I'm like, you know what? The truth is, though, and you can do that, and that's great. And if I were to say to you, what happened yesterday? You would think and maybe review and reflect over your day. And, some people might talk about their job or their career, their business, how they spent their time, what they were doing with their family. They might have went for a walk in the woods. They might have been sitting at a computer all day. Regardless of the events or the activities, when you sink into it a little bit, you'll discover there's more that happened beyond the surface of things. It's that whole look under there, right? Look under there. What's next?
Look
What else?
under the hood.
Yeah, look under there. And what we'll start tapping into is like, oh, I did, like, in the middle of the day, meet up for a friend with a friend, and we had lunch, and we were talking about these cool synchronistic things. And I'm like, okay, there's some story, but we'll pick out moments and learn how to just get comfortable sharing a moment. And then you can take that moment and you can share it on paper.
Mm.
And so there's processes, there's ways to work with things, because sometimes when we think of our stories, especially if they're really vulnerable, some people are very comfortable sharing a story in this format, like just person to person, maybe not online, but person to person. But the idea of putting that on paper for other people to see can be terrifying, and it
Totally.
is vulnerable. The thing that has helped me is and I just wrote a post about this because I was just in it. I was feeling it. And I was just typing after an experience I had. I was talking with someone who wanted to be in the project, and we were going back and forth about her worries, her fears, her doubts. And I'm not going to get into those. Those are her private things. But the essence of what came out of that, I was inspired to write about it, to write a post about how these things come up for people. And if we can come back to the idea that whatever we went through, whatever we experienced, is the sharing of that in itself is medicine for
Mm.
you and for others,
Yes, it
for
is.
one other person or thousands of other people. And it takes courage to trust that process, to believe that it's medicine. And you don't have to fully believe in yourself. You don't have to believe you're an amazing writer. You just have to trust the little bit of the nudge that says, I feel guided to do something with this. I don't know what, I don't know how. We really carry you through the process. I say we, myself and Shanda Trofe, the amazing publisher that is our shepherd of the experience, that helps
Shanda
us through.
Shanda published my solo book, and she was amazing.
Yes. Oh, right. Like,
Mhm.
world of difference working with someone like that. Like,
For
it's,
sure.
didn't you feel like just really
Oh,
held, like,
for sure.
emotionally, and just
For
like
sure.
through the whole thing? It's
Absolutely.
such
And
a
again,
gift.
like I am not a writer. Like I do a lot of, I'm creative at a lot of things, but I'm not a writer. And, joining the Wild Woman, book, and then having Shanda and you and Shanda through that process, then Shanda, it's amazing how you help each person along the way. And again, there's so many people I connect to. Most of my coaching clients that I work with, they have a book inside of them, and
Yes.
they just don't know how to get it out. And here you are offering, an incredible opportunity for someone's to be, for this to be someone's first step. So can you
Yes.
share, with us how someone who might be watching now live or on the replay, and they really want to write or share their story, and maybe this could be a first step for them. Can you share a little bit about the project?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you, first of all, for the opportunity.
For sure.
Absolutely. So, first, we have authors from all different backgrounds, level of experience. We have first time authors who have never published anything, who might have done a little bit of writing in a journal or are just getting comfortable expressing themselves in this way. And then we have seasoned authors that are like, they've published so many things. I'm always like, amazed, like, wow, you're a part of this project, that's so great, you're like well known or you're whatever in the world, and still feeling called to come together. The balance of that, like that, it's on like a spectrum of these amazing individuals,
Mhm,
is so supportive. So the people that are new get a lot of support because you have all these other people cheering you on in
mhm,
this very tight community, and supporting you, and they're there, and you can share, you can ask for feedback, you can get ideas, you can craft your idea a little bit more. We have sessions built specifically into the framework that are different. So my background is I'm also a certified hypnotherapist and advanced yoga nidra practitioner. I do a lot of different tools and modalities, and so I created a few of them specifically for the authors to go through. So if they're nervous, if they're scared, we have
mhm,
brainstorming sessions we're going to be doing in this next one. I have a process I guide authors to help them not only relax their nerves, but tap into their souls, the creative message. So if you're just feeling like an impulse, right, to just explore that, you can reach out. And the best thing to do is honestly to email me. We don't have this publicly posted as far as a website or anything like that, because we really want to make sure that the authors that join this project are going to be a good fit, for us in that way. And so if you email me at melissa@melissacorter.com, I can share some of the basic information, the price point, what you get, how it works, that kind of a thing. And then if you join us, you go into this, it's not open yet, but we will be opening our official Facebook community. And this is where we do some live training. So we help you with sales, marketing, but really it's more inspiration, more
mhm,
of framing your process. You don't have to worry about editing. We include editing. It's included in the process. You get to submit a chapter. Your chapter is between 1,500 and 1,800 words. We'll have more final details on that once we know how many people are joining us for the project. All the formatting is taken care of. You also will share your bio with us, so we kind of help you shape that a little bit. And there's just so many different pieces of support that we offer. But the emotional is one of the biggest ones. So the framework of how to do it, what to do, when it's needed, deadlines, timelines, we don't throw it at you at first. It's over time. You get piece by piece by piece so that you feel like you're moving together with this group. You're not overwhelmed by the process, but emotionally we support you so that you also feel like you're easing some of the nerves around writing and sharing. I also like to suggest to people that you don't have to share your big story if you don't want to. If you feel like you have a big story and you want to put that in your solo book, you can do that. And you can do something that sort of supports that or is similar to that message of that. If you don't have a business and you have zero interest in having a business and you're not in the spiritual world or personal development, but you just want to do this for yourself, it's perfect.
mhm,
Again, it's just about intention. We just want people to join us that are very intentional, that are willing to be in this group. We do have it capped. So no matter what we do, we will not have any more than 33 of us at max. And I
mhm,
don't think we're actually going to go that high for this project anyway. Um, And then you have months. So you have a couple of months to put your 1,500 words together. And then we come together and we do a big launch, and it's all online. And it's so fun. And because Shanda, our amazing book genius, she not only helps us to rank in the number one category, various number one categories on Amazon, but also our ranking is now moved into an international best-selling
Wow,
author category.
very
So
cool.
that's huge for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It just being able to say that, I can't tell you the comfort, the pride, the excitement, the joy, the gratitude that some of these authors have expressed to me of just being able to say that and what it has done for them, even if they don't have a network or an audience. Maybe it's their one, crazy relative that's buying the book to support them, but they did this thing that was just such a milestone in their life, and I've heard that over and over again. And I just feel honored because it's more than a project. It's not just a book that goes on the shelf. We have had hundreds of people comment on how amazing these books are, how they've helped us. You can see the reviews on Amazon for all of the books. I have repeat authors that come back into the project because they just love it and they had such a great experience. And it's just such a joy. And it's expensive and time consuming. So I will say that this is also our last one that we're doing. So we're closing it out as a trilogy. This will be the third book in the trilogy. It's called The Wild Woman's Book of Alchemy. So it's basically stories of change and transformation. And so if that feels called to you, or that calls to you, we would love to consider you for a chapter. And please feel free to email for the information.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank
My
you.
experience with the Wild Women series has been amazing, and I thank you and Shanda, and I appreciate you coming on today and sharing with us. I will definitely have your information here for whoever may be interested. I know you gave your email. I'll also have it there if anyone has
Thank you.
questions for me. It's always such a pleasure to connect with you, and I could be here with you forever. So thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for those of you watching and on the replay. Because again, I'm so grateful that you're here. I really mean it, because I know there are so many other places that you can be. And please do share, like, and subscribe, because it does help us continue to bring in the great guests. So thank you all so much. I wish you all a beautiful day and stay blessed. Hang on with me, Melissa. Thank you guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.